My name is Natalie Pierce. I am 34 years old. And last Christmas, I walked into my parents' house in Boulder, thinking I would finally have a peaceful holiday after losing my grandmother. The tree sparkled. The turkey smelled perfect. And for a moment, I believed it might actually feel like family again. But then my father pulled out a stack of papers at the dinner table. My mother's eyes filled with tears. And my sister Melissa sat there with a brand new Rolex on her wrist, smiling like she already owned my $2 million inheritance. They said it so casually, as if it were obvious, that the money should go to cover her debts. That night I realized Christmas wasn't about family at all. It was about a plan to strip me of everything my grandmother had trusted me with. What happened next turned that quiet holiday into the most shocking confrontation of my life. And by the end, no one at that table would ever see Christmas the same way again. I can still remember the way the air felt that night, heavy with unspoken tension. Even before I stepped inside, nothing about this visit would be ordinary. And though I tried to convince myself, it was just another Christmas. Deep down, I already sensed the stage had been set for something far more dangerous than holiday cheer. The snow crunched under my boots as I stepped out of my car and looked at the old Pierce house in Boulder, Colorado. Strings of white lights lined the roof, and the tall pine tree in the front yard was wrapped in red and gold ribbons. For a moment it almost felt magical, like the Christmases I remembered as a child. But a heaviness sat in my chest that the lights could not lift. Last year I had buried my grandmother Martha, and this year, I told myself I was ready for a quiet family holiday. I wanted warmth. Maybe even some sense of peace after the long months of grief. I carried a bag of wrapped gifts in one hand and adjusted my coat with the other. The front door swung open before I even reached it, and my mother Evelyn stood there, smiling too brightly. Her voice pitched just a little too high as she said how wonderful it was to see me. She pulled me into a hug, the scent of her cranberry candle clinging to her sweater. Behind her, I could already smell roast turkey and cinnamon. Inside, the house looked like a Christmas postcard. The tree reached nearly to the ceiling, covered in glass ornaments collected over decades. On the coffee table sat a platter of gingerbread cookies, iced in white and green. Eggnog steamed from a punch bowl. My father Thomas came from the den, patting my shoulder, his smile wide but somehow rehearsed. Melissa was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand, her blonde hair styled perfectly, nails painted red to match her velvet dress. I noticed her wrist first. A brand new Rolex, flashing in the light of the Christmas tree. Through the window behind her, parked in the driveway, was a silver Tesla with a big red bow still tied to the side mirror. I tried to keep my face neutral as I set the gifts under the tree. Everyone knew Melissa was drowning in debt. It had been whispered about at Thanksgiving, murmured in family phone calls, and I had seen it myself in the way she dodged simple questions about her finances. And yet here she was, flashing a luxury watch and a new car as if she had nothing to worry about. My father gestured toward the dining room, where the long table was already set with china and polished silverware. He said how this year was going to be special, that after such a hard year we all needed to be together. I nodded and forced a smile. But inside I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. Melissa rose from the couch and walked toward me, tilting her wrist just enough for the Rolex to catch the light. She said she wanted me to notice it, that it was a gift to herself for surviving such a stressful year. I murmured that it looked nice, and she leaned closer, whispering that she had big plans coming, bigger than anything I could imagine. I pulled back and simply asked how she was doing. She laughed and said she was thriving, then sipped her wine like the word itself was proof. At that moment, my mother called from the kitchen, asking Melissa to help bring out the cranberry sauce. Melissa waved her hand dismissively and said she would in a moment. I followed my mother instead, grateful for the excuse to step away. The kitchen was hot from the oven and smelled of rosemary and butter. Evelyn fussed over the turkey, brushing glaze across the skin and adjusting the oven temperature. She looked at me with watery eyes and said how nice it was to have me home. how this holiday would bring us all back together. I reached for a bowl of rolls to help carry them in. But inside, I felt the ache of doubt. Nothing about this felt like healing. When we all sat down at the table a little later, Melissa made sure to place her Tesla keys right beside her plate. She picked them up at least twice to jingle them as she told stories about people she knew in Denver, about the trendy restaurants she had visited, and the boutiques where she had found her dress. My father laughed a little too loudly at her jokes. My mother kept nodding with admiration. I listened quietly, pushing mashed potatoes across my plate, thinking of the months I had spent at my grandmother's bedside, the long nights in the hospital, the final whispered conversations. Martha had taught me to read financial statements when I was 12, had shown me how to invest my babysitting money instead of spending it, had reminded me that being responsible was its own form of power. Watching Melissa brag while our parents beamed made me feel like I was a guest in a play I had never agreed to be part of. I set down my fork and folded my napkin in my lap. I reminded myself that this was Christmas, that I had come here hoping for peace. But as Melissa tapped her Rolex against her wine glass to get our attention, smiling as if she were the star of the evening, I felt the air shift. Something was wrong. This was not just a holiday dinner. It was the beginning of something else. The sound of that glass being tapped pulled me somewhere else entirely. Back to a small diner off Main Street in Kansas City, where my grandmother Martha used to take me every Sunday. I was 7 years old, legs dangling from the booth seat, staring at a plate of pancakes stacked taller than I thought I could finish. She always ordered the same thing: black coffee for her, orange juice for me, and a side of bacon. What mattered most wasn't the food but the ritual she created out of it. She would take a pancake and cut it into 4 uneven pieces, sliding the knife slowly, so I paid attention. One piece she pushed to the side and told me that was for living. Rent and food and everything you need to get by. Another piece she set aside for saving. Money that must never be touched unless it was for the future. A third piece, she explained, was for giving, because no one could stand tall in this world if they only thought of themselves. And the smallest sliver, the one barely big enough to cover with syrup, she handed to me and said that was for enjoying today. At 7, I thought it was silly. But by the time I was 10, I had jars in my room labeled living, saving, giving, and fun. Martha would come over and ask how I divided my allowance. Never judging, just nodding with that proud twinkle in her eye when I showed her the coins stacked in each jar. When I was 16 and working weekends at the public library, she helped me open my first investment account. I remember the way her hands shook slightly as she held the papers, but her eyes were steady when she told me this was how I would build a life of independence. She had grown up during lean times, and she believed discipline was a kind of freedom. Martha was also the only one who noticed what it cost me to grow up in a house where Melissa could do no wrong. I can still hear her voice when she leaned across the diner table, lowering it, so only I could hear. Your parents will always protect your sister. They love you. But they shield her in a way they do not shield you. Do not let that turn your heart bitter. But do not let them use you either. She was right. When Melissa blew through her allowance, my parents would slip her extra. When she broke a neighbor's window trying to sneak out, Dad paid for the damage. Meanwhile, I worked double shifts to save for a laptop, only to have that money borrowed away when Melissa had another accident. I told Martha once, tears stinging my eyes, that it wasn't fair. She folded her napkin neatly and said that fairness was not something I could wait for. I had to create boundaries and guard them fiercely. One memory in particular still presses against my chest. I must have been 19. Home from my first semester at the University of Colorado. Melissa had already dropped out of her community college program but was living large, showing off designer bags she said were from friends. At dinner, my parents gushed about how creative she was, how one day she would run her own business. Martha sat quietly until she caught my eye. After dessert, she took me aside on the porch where the night air was sharp and cold. She placed her hand on mine and spoke in the calm, steady tone she always used when she wanted me to listen closely. Your sister will always find a way to drain what others have. She does not mean to destroy, but she takes without thinking. You must protect yourself. Natalie, do not ever let them take your future away. That sentence had clung to me through college, through every time I visited home and found Melissa with a new excuse. A new problem. A new bailout. It was Martha who taught me that setting limits wasn't selfish. It was survival. The clink of Melissa's Rolex against the glass at the Christmas table brought those words roaring back. I watched her stand there, her red dress catching the glow of the tree lights, her voice lilting as if she were about to give a toast. My parents looked at her with that same indulgent pride they had shown her since we were children. For a moment, I almost saw the diner table in place of the Christmas table. The pancakes divided into pieces, my grandmother's hand guiding mine with the knife. I forced myself to take a sip of water and focus on the present. Melissa was talking about how proud she was to be back on her feet, how she had exciting ventures lined up for the new year. She gestured with her wrist, so the Rolex flashed again. My father chuckled and told her how inspiring it was. My mother dabbed at her eyes, saying she always knew Melissa would find her way. I kept my napkin folded in my lap. Mayaf tight. Hearing Martha's warning as clear as if she were seated beside me, my sister will always find a way to drain what others have. Do not ever let them take your future away. Melissa lifted her glass higher and told everyone she wanted to thank the family for supporting her. That next year would be her year. That she could feel it. My parents clinked their glasses with hers, smiling wide. I did not raise mine. I set it down carefully, pressing my palms flat against the table to steady myself, and reminded myself that tonight was only beginning. The last time I saw my grandmother alert and strong enough to speak for hours was in the spring of 2023. In a hospital room in Kansas City, where the curtains let in only a thin line of sunlight. Machines hummed beside her bed. But her eyes were sharp when she motioned for me to sit down. She held my hand tightly, her skin paper thin, yet her grip steady. She told me she needed me to listen more carefully than I ever had before. A few minutes later, a man in a navy suit entered, carrying a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Franklin Doyle, her attorney for more than 20 years. His voice was low and calm, but there was something in his eyes that told me this was not just a casual visit. He shook my hand firmly, then placed a stack of documents on the rolling table beside my grandmother's bed. Martha cleared her throat and told him to explain. Franklin opened the folder and began walking me through what they had discussed in earlier meetings. My grandmother wanted her estate, valued at $2 million, moved into an irrevocable trust immediately. While she was still of sound mind, my name would be listed as the sole beneficiary, and Franklin would serve as co-trustee. The transfer would bypass probate completely, meaning that once she passed, there would be no delay, no opportunity for interference. I remember blinking hard, trying to process the number. 2 million. She looked at me and smiled faintly, reminding me of all those pancakes she had sliced in careful sections. She said she had built that money through decades of saving, small investments, and the sale of her house in Kansas City. It was not luck. It was discipline. And she wanted me to benefit from it the way she had always intended. Franklin continued, his pen gliding across the pages as he pointed out specific clauses. One stood out in bold print. No disbursements, loans, or gifts may be made to Thomas Pierce, Evelyn Pierce, or Melissa Pierce without written consent from both trustees. He paused there and looked directly at me. This was the safeguard, he said, to prevent what Martha feared most. She had told him about the years of favoritism, the constant rescues, the enabling. He explained that if Melissa ever genuinely reformed and needed help, there was a process where both he and I would review it together. Otherwise, nothing left the trust. I glanced at my grandmother and saw the relief in her face. She told me she could finally breathe, knowing that what she had built would not be drained by reckless spending or endless rescues. She reached for my hand again and said she loved her son and daughter-in-law. But she knew them too well. They would find ways to pressure me, to guilt me, to tell me I owed it to Melissa. This trust was her gift of protection. As Franklin notarized the papers with a witness from the hospital staff, he leaned closer to me and spoke quietly. "You must keep this confidential. Natalie, do not mention the trust to anyone until the time comes. Your parents will assume everything is still tied up in the will. That illusion is to your benefit." He slid the documents back into his briefcase, clicked the latches shut, and gave me a look that was both warning and reassurance. "They will try every angle. You must be prepared." That night, I drove back to Denver with my grandmother's words echoing in my head. The highway stretched long and flat under the glow of streetlights, and I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. $2 million. The number was staggering. But more than that was the responsibility. She trusted me to hold firm against my own family. She trusted me not to give in to guilt or pressure. In the weeks that followed, I visited her every weekend. Sometimes, she was too tired to talk. But when she had energy, she reminded me over and over to be careful. She told me stories of times my father had asked her for money to cover Melissa's mistakes, of how she had refused each time. She admitted she worried that after her death, they would come to me. And if I was not prepared, I might cave out of love or obligation. Each time she warned me. I promised her I would stand firm. The memory of those conversations played in my mind as I sat at the Christmas table, watching Melissa hold court with her Rolex flashing in the candlelight. I thought of Franklin's steady voice, of the pen sliding over the page, of the clause that named each family member who could not touch the trust. I thought of my grandmother's fragile hand in mine as she told me to protect my future. I shifted in my chair and listened as Melissa boasted about a new boutique she wanted to launch in downtown Denver, saying she was already in talks for a lease. My parents clapped politely, nodding along, their pride as transparent as glass. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly how she thought this would be funded. And I also knew she was about to learn that her expectations would never become reality. I pushed my plate slightly forward, folded my napkin once more, and sat back. Franklin's words came back like a bell ringing clear. "They will try every angle. Be prepared." I glanced at my sister across the table, her laughter loud and bright, and reminded myself that my grandmother's last gift was not just money. It was armor. And I intended to use it. My mother Evelyn moved around the dining room like a conductor, keeping a symphony in order. She straightened silverware that was already straight, shifted candles a fraction of an inch, and refilled water glasses that were nearly full. Her voice floated above the table, cheerful and light, talking about how grateful she was that we were all together this Christmas, how wonderful it was to see the family intact after such a difficult year. Her words were meant to smooth over the tension, but I could hear the effort in every syllable. I watched her carefully adjust the cranberry dish in front of Melissa as if to spotlight her. My father Thomas leaned back with his glass of red wine, nodding, smiling at both my mother and sister. Their eyes moved to Melissa like she was the centerpiece of the entire evening. It was a familiar rhythm, one I had lived with all my life. I remembered being 17 and standing in an electronics store, my savings envelope tucked in my jacket. I had worked 6 months shelving books at the public library, counting every dollar so I could buy a laptop before heading to college. The day I finally had enough, I came home to find my father waiting with a grim look on his face. Melissa had wrecked her bike into a neighbor's fence and broken several lawn ornaments. The neighbor was threatening to make a police report. My parents decided the quickest way to handle it was to borrow from my savings. They promised me it was temporary. They never paid it back. I worked another month before I could walk back into that store and buy the laptop myself. Melissa never mentioned the accident again. Later, when I was already at the University of Colorado, trying to cover tuition with a patchwork of scholarships and part-time jobs, Melissa enrolled in a private college in Denver. She lasted 3 semesters before failing out. But every time she ran short on tuition or housing, my parents found a way to cover it. They even refinanced the Boulder house once. telling me proudly they were supporting her dream. When I asked about a small contribution to my tuition, they shook their heads. They told me I was smart enough to figure it out on my own, that I would manage. The memories pressed in on me as I sat at the Christmas table watching my mother fuss over Melissa's plate while ignoring mine. I kept my hands folded and listened as Melissa talked about a boutique she wanted to open downtown. My parents nodded along, eyes wide, as if she were announcing the cure for cancer. I forced a smile and reminded myself that Franklin had been right. They would try every angle. Tonight was already starting to look like one of those angles. Melissa lifted her glass again, her rings catching the light. She thanked Mom for the meal and Dad for always believing in her. Her voice softened, pretending to break, as she said she would not be standing here without her family. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin. My father raised his glass. They both turned to look at me, expectant, as if I should join the chorus. I kept my glass on the table and nodded politely. The room smelled of roasted turkey and nutmeg. But under that sweetness, I felt the bitterness rising. This was not simply a family holiday dinner. Every smile was too forced. Every compliment too exaggerated. Every gesture just a little too rehearsed. My mother kept announcing how perfect everything was. How happy she was to see Melissa glowing again. How she had always known her eldest daughter would shine. My father kept repeating how proud he was. It was a script they had practiced. And Melissa was their star performer. I glanced at the Christmas tree in the corner, its ornaments sparkling, gifts piled beneath. The scene should have filled me with comfort. But instead it felt staged, a backdrop for something larger. As I listened to Melissa describe her plans for a new commercial lease, she claimed she was close to signing. My stomach turned. I recognized the pattern from years ago. The laptop, the refinanced house. Every sacrifice had been dressed up as family unity. Every theft of opportunity disguised as support for Melissa. I folded my napkin slowly, pressing the crease flat with my fingers, and felt my pulse steady. Tonight was not just about dinner, or stories, or presents. My parents were building towards something, and Melissa was leading the charge. I could feel it in the careful way my mother smiled, in the pride in my father's eyes, in the way Melissa's laugh filled the room like she already owned it. It struck me then with painful clarity. This entire evening was not a celebration. It was a performance. And I was the audience they needed to convince. My father set his wine glass down with a quiet clink and leaned forward as if he were about to share a piece of small talk. His voice was calm, almost conversational. When he said that Grandma Martha's $2 million should be put toward Melissa's debts, he added that I had a steady career, a home of my own, and that I did not need the money the way my sister did. The words slid across the table as casually as if he were suggesting another slice of turkey. For a heartbeat, I thought I had misheard him. Then my mother Evelyn placed her hand on Melissa's and nodded. She said that Melissa had been through such a difficult season, that she had stumbled but deserved another chance, and that I was fortunate enough to be in a position to help. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I placed it down carefully and folded my hands together so they would not tremble. Inside me, something sharp twisted. But outwardly, I forced a mask of calm. Melissa lowered her gaze in mock humility, swirling her wine. Her voice was soft when she said she hated to be a burden, but she could not carry this weight alone. I felt the heat in my chest rise. They had not even asked. They had decided. In their eyes, the inheritance was no longer mine. It was a solution to Melissa's reckless spending, and I was merely the instrument to deliver it. My father cleared his throat. Continuing, as if he were explaining the weather, he said $2 million was more than enough to settle everything. That once Melissa was debt-free, she could finally start fresh. He added that families should support one another, especially in times like these. My mother dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin and turned to me. Her eyes were moist, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. She reminded me that Melissa was my only sister, that blood was thicker than anything else, and that I had always been the responsible one. She said I would not even feel the loss. Melissa raised her head then, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She said she would pay it back someday, that this was only temporary, and that I would see it was for the good of the whole family. I pressed my nails into the cloth of my napkin under the table, steadying my breath. Every part of me wanted to shout, to throw their words back in their faces. But instead, I forced myself to remain still. I had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than anger. My father watched me carefully, as if gauging whether his plan was landing. He took another sip of wine and added that Grandma would have wanted this. He said she always believed in helping family, and that this was the most sensible path forward. At that, a bitter taste filled my mouth. I thought of Martha in her hospital bed, her voice steady as she insisted on the trust. She had known this moment would come, known the exact language my father would use, the casual tone, the appeal to duty and love. She had given me the tools to face it. And now here it was, unfolding exactly as she had predicted. Melissa leaned toward me slightly, lowering her voice as if to make it intimate. She said she could hardly sleep at night, with creditors calling, that the stress was unbearable, that she prayed every day for relief. My mother squeezed her hand, whispering that everything would be all right soon. I sat back and let the words wash over me. They mistook my quiet for consideration, mistook my stillness for agreement. In reality, I was studying them, memorizing every look and phrase, every manipulation wrapped in holiday cheer. The table around me sparkled with candles and ornaments, but it might as well have been a stage. My parents were the chorus, Melissa the star, and I the audience they had chosen to sway. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and placed it back down. My father gave me a hopeful smile. My mother leaned closer, her eyes pleading. Melissa tilted her wrist so the Rolex gleamed again under the lights. I met each of their eyes in turn, keeping my expression calm. Then I folded my napkin once more and told myself I would let them talk as long as they wanted. They thought they were winning me over. In truth, every word they spoke only sharpened the resolve inside me. The turkey cooled on my plate. The cranberry sauce congealed at the edges. But no one noticed. All attention was fixed on me, waiting for my answer. I gave none. I stayed silent, my heart steady, the storm contained within. Tonight was far from over, and I intended to see just how far they would go. I pushed my chair back slightly and excused myself, saying I should check on the oven before the pie burned. My mother nodded without question, too wrapped up in Melissa's performance to notice anything else. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, making sure my steps sounded casual on the hardwood floor. Once I passed the archway, I veered down the hall toward my father's office. The door was cracked open. The familiar smell of old books and wood polish drifted out, a sharp contrast to the cinnamon and rosemary filling the rest of the house. I hesitated only a moment before slipping inside, my pulse quickening. The office was orderly as always. Shelves lined with history texts, records stacked neatly in a corner. But what caught my eye was the manila folder sitting squarely in the center of the desk. Melissa, finances. My throat tightened. My father's handwriting was careful and precise, the black ink stark against the folder tab. I reached for it with trembling hands and opened it quickly, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard from the dining room. The first page was a spreadsheet printed in color. Credit card balances, due dates, minimum payments. The number at the bottom made my stomach flip. $250,000. Interest charges stacked like bricks on her back. The next section detailed bank loans totaling $150,000, with late fees in bold red. A final page showed $30,000 in private notes from individuals. Handwritten IOUs that looked hastily scanned, added together. The figure loomed above me, like a weight too heavy to ignore. Over $400,000. I turned the page again and found emails printed in full. A bank officer warning that foreclosure proceedings on Melissa's Denver condo would begin if she did not bring her account current. Another letter from a collections department demanding payment. My eyes traced the cold, impersonal sentences and then froze when I saw the attachments tucked into the back pocket of the folder. Photographs. Melissa on a beach in Miami. Sunglasses perched on her nose. Champagne glass raised. Melissa in Paris in front of the Eiffel Tower. Wearing a designer coat. Melissa at a resort in Mexico. Sprawled beside a pool with a cocktail in hand. Dates in the corners matched perfectly with the same months she had told our parents she was under unbearable financial strain. I gritted my teeth. Bile rising in my throat. These were not the choices of someone crushed by debt. These were the choices of someone living lavishly while expecting others to foot the bill. My grandmother had been right to shield me. And Franklin had been right to warn me. I slipped my phone from my pocket and began snapping quiet photographs of each page. Each email. Each damning image. My hands were steady despite the storm inside me. The shutter clicked softly in the quiet room. A sound I prayed would not carry. Just as I finished the last picture, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My blood ran cold. I slid the folder back into place exactly as I had found it and closed the cover. I straightened, forcing my breath even, and turned toward the bookshelf just as the door creaked open. My mother stood in the doorway, her expression questioning. "What are you doing in here, sweetheart?" I forced a smile, running a finger along the edge of a framed family photograph on the shelf. "Just looking at old pictures. I miss Grandma so much," I said, my voice soft, letting the words carry weight. Her face softened instantly. She stepped inside, glancing at the photo herself, and sighed. "I know," she said. "She loved you so dearly." Then she seemed to remember her mission and added quickly that the pie was almost ready. "We should head back to the table." I nodded, tucking my phone deep into my pocket. The images safe, now. As we walked back down the hall, I kept my expression neutral. But inside my heart raced. The truth was in my hands. Undeniable. And I knew that what they had asked of me at the table was not a plea for help. It was an orchestrated plan to cover up a disaster. When we reached the dining room, Melissa was laughing loudly, telling another story about how she had connections lined up for her new boutique. My father clapped along. My mother smiled, as if nothing in the world were wrong. I sat down in my chair again, smoothing my napkin over my lap, my mind burning with the photographs tucked away on my phone. They thought they had me cornered, but I was no longer sitting in the dark. I had proof, and I was ready to see how much further they were willing to go. Melissa leaned back in her chair, swirling the last of her wine as she launched into another story about her big comeback. She described a downtown lease she claimed was nearly secured, how investors were circling, and how she could finally bring her vision of a luxury boutique to life. My father beamed as if she had already signed the papers. My mother rested her chin on her hand, eyes misty with pride. I sat quietly, my phone heavy in my pocket. Every detail she spoke, painting itself against the proof I already carried. The shrill sound of Melissa's phone cut through her speech, startling the table into silence. She glanced at the screen, her face blanching for a fraction of a second before she forced a smile and held it up. "Sorry. Just a quick call," she said lightly. Pushing back her chair, she did not leave the room. She answered right there at the table, her voice dropping an octave. "This is Melissa." The speaker on the other end was loud enough that even I could hear the clipped, professional tone. "This is Mr. Harrison with Rocky Mountain Bank. We have not received payment on your outstanding balance. If we do not receive funds immediately after the holiday break, we will have no choice but to proceed with foreclosure on the Denver property." A hush fell over the room. Melissa's knuckles whitened around her phone. She turned slightly in her chair, her voice tight, but still attempting lightness. "Yes. I am aware. I told your office. I will handle it right after Christmas." She paused, swallowing hard. "No. There is no need to escalate. I said I would handle it. The officer's voice grew sharper. Miss Pierce. We have extended multiple deadlines. This is the final notice. Melissa's hand shot to the volume button, and she pressed the phone to her chest. We will talk later, she said hurriedly, and disconnected the call without another word. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father cleared his throat and laughed weakly. Picking up the serving spoon as if a new helping of potatoes could cover the tension, my mother clapped her hands together and exclaimed how wonderful the stuffing had turned out this year. Neither of them looked directly at me. Melissa stared at her plate. Her face flushed red, then forced a brittle laugh. Creditors are always overdramatic, she said, waving her hand. It is nothing. Just a misunderstanding. The air in the room had shifted. My father began asking me about work in Denver. His voice forced. The words rushed. My mother interrupted with a question about my townhouse. How I decorated for the holidays. If I still hosted colleagues. Their voices overlapped like two actors improvising badly after forgetting their lines. I glanced at the Christmas tree. The lights twinkling in steady rhythm. A backdrop to the spectacle unfolding. Melissa had just been exposed in front of me. And instead of addressing it, my parents scrambled to smooth it over. The hypocrisy was so naked I almost laughed. Melissa picked up her wine again, her hand trembling slightly, and said she did not want to bore us with financial details. She pivoted into a story about a gala she attended earlier in the year, describing the gowns, the food, the people she claimed she had networked with. My parents leaned forward, nodding, desperate to redirect the evening back to the illusion of success. I let the charade play out, sipping water slowly, my eyes scanning each of their faces. The weight of the folder I had seen earlier pressed against my memory. Over $400,000 of debt. Photographs of vacations she had taken while the bills piled higher. And now, a bank officer's voice echoing in my ears, confirming every number. The gingerbread cookies on the coffee table remained untouched. The cranberry sauce had already begun to skin over. No one cared. All that mattered was the performance, yet cracks had spread across the stage tonight. And no amount of laughter or polite chatter could plaster them back together. Melissa finally set her glass down and straightened her shoulders. Her voice steadier now. She said she was tired of negativity and preferred to focus on the bright future ahead. My mother clapped softly, as if her daughter had delivered a speech worth applauding. My father nodded vigorously and lifted his glass. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded, my face unreadable. But inside, every word from that phone call replayed in my mind. Final notice. Foreclosure. Immediate payment. The table glittered with holiday cheer. Yet the truth had slipped out. Uninvited and undeniable. And though they scrambled to bury it under small talk and false smiles, the weight of it hung heavy in the room. I did not need to say a word. The silence spoke for me. My Aunt Susan was the first to break the fragile quiet. She set her fork down with a deliberate clink, her sharp eyes scanning the table as though she had finally grown tired of the pretense. Her voice cut clean through the Christmas chatter that had just started to bubble back up. Natalie, do not let them corner you. Years ago, Thomas came to me for money when Melissa was behind on her tuition. He said it was a small loan, that he would pay me back as soon as he could. That was nearly 15 years ago. I am still waiting. The words landed like stones dropped into water, rippling through every person seated at the table. My father stiffened, his wine glass suspended halfway to his lips. His cheeks flushed, and his eyes darted quickly toward my mother as if searching for a script. My mother's smile froze, the corners trembling before she forced them back into place. Melissa sat motionless, her nails tapping against the stem of her glass. Her face angled down, but her eyes shifting rapidly toward me. I stared at Susan, feeling a strange mix of relief and shock. It was not just me. I had always assumed the weight of Melissa's rescues fell only on my shoulders. But now here was Susan, voicing aloud what had long been whispered in fragments. Before anyone could recover, Elaine, My cousin, sitting 2 chairs down, shifted in her seat. She was younger than me by a few years, normally quiet at gatherings. But now her face was pale and resolute. "I know exactly what Aunt Susan means," she said firmly. "Melissa borrowed money from me too. She told me she needed a few hundred to cover bills until her next paycheck. That was 5 years ago. She stopped answering my calls. She blocked my number. I never saw a dime of it back." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest, but not out of sympathy. The gasp was outrage. "That is enough," she snapped, her voice cracking with fury. "This is Christmas dinner, not some tribunal. We will not dredge up nonsense at my table." Susan's laugh was short and bitter. "Nonsense? Evelyn, you call unpaid debts nonsense. You let Melissa charm everyone while you and Thomas sweep the wreckage under the rug." My mother's face turned crimson. She slammed her napkin down, pointing a trembling finger across the table. "You will not insult my daughter in my house." The fire crackled in the living room, the only sound that filled the pause. Then Susan leaned forward, her tone low but cutting. "Your daughter has been leeching off everyone who dares to trust her. That is not an insult. That is fact." Melissa shifted in her chair, her shoulders curling inward. But then she forced out a nervous laugh. "People misremember things," she said lightly. "I always intended to pay Elaine back. And Aunt Susan. You never gave me that much anyway." Elaine's eyes flashed. "Do not lie. Melissa, you knew exactly what you were doing." I sat frozen. Not from fear, but from the clarity sinking in. All these years I believed I was the only one they leaned on, the only one robbed of savings and sacrifices. But here it was, spread bare in front of holiday decorations and half-eaten plates of turkey. My family was not unique in being used. The pattern was larger, woven through more lives than I had known. My father finally spoke, his voice forced into a calm he did not feel. "We do not need to rehash old misunderstandings. Melissa has struggled. Yes, but she is rebuilding now. That is what matters." Elaine shook her head. "Rebuilding on whose dime? She always has someone else to carry the weight." The lights of the Christmas tree twinkled behind Melissa as she stared down at her plate, her jaw clenched, her mouth opening as if to respond. But no words came out. My mother rushed to fill the silence, grabbing the serving dish and urging everyone to have more potatoes, to remember the reason for the season, to think of love and forgiveness. Her voice cracked at the edges, betraying how desperate she was to redirect. But the shift had already happened. The performance, so carefully staged, had unraveled thread by thread. Susan reached for her glass, her eyes still fixed on me. "You do not owe them your future, Natalie," she said, her voice lower now, steady. "Do not let history repeat itself." Her words pierced deeper than she knew. I remembered every time my savings had vanished into Melissa's mistakes. Every time my parents told me to be strong while they poured everything into my sister. Now Susan's blunt truth and Elaine's weary confession built a wall behind me. Proof that I was not imagining the favoritism, not exaggerating the manipulation. Melissa finally lifted her head. Her voice wavered as she insisted she was turning a corner. That this year would be different. That people loved to hold her past against her. Her hands fluttered as if brushing invisible dust from the air. Her laugh brittle, her eyes glassy. My father placed a hand on her shoulder, glaring around the table. "That is enough. We will not tear each other apart over money tonight." But no one moved. The turkey bones lay bare on the platter, cranberry sauce melting into the white linen, gingerbread cookies untouched. The glow of the candles flickered across tense faces, no longer masking the cracks, but illuminating them. I folded my napkin slowly, deliberately. For the first time all evening, I felt a quiet strength build in my chest. I was not alone. Others had been drained. Others had been silenced. And now they were speaking. The truth was no longer mine to hold in isolation. Susan leaned back, Satisfied she had said her piece, Elaine looked down, her hands twisting together. But her courage had already added its weight to the table. My mother busied herself with plates, stacking them noisily, though no one had finished. My father's jaw worked as if he were grinding stone. Melissa raised her glass again, forcing a laugh, trying to recapture the spotlight, but her hands trembled. She looked at me, her smile faltering. And for the first time I saw the performance slipping. I did not smile back. I reached for my water, let the cold liquid steady me, and set the glass down gently. The room was tense, fractured, fragile. But I knew something important now. The cracks were not mine alone to see. They were visible to everyone. Undeniable. Spreading wider with every passing second. The Christmas tree glowed steadily in the corner, ornaments shining, presents piled beneath. But none of us were looking at it anymore. All eyes had turned to what could no longer be ignored. I stepped away from the dining room after the dishes were cleared, the heavy air still clinging to my skin. I needed a moment of cold, something sharper than the heat of all those eyes pressing in. Pushing open the sliding door, I walked out onto the back porch where the night stretched wide and silent over Boulder. Snow crunched under the soles of my shoes as I pulled my coat tighter. The air was so crisp it burned my lungs. Someone was already out there, standing near the railing with a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He turned as I stepped out, and recognition hit me instantly. Daniel Brooks. He had dated Melissa years ago. When I was finishing grad school, I had not seen him since, and the lines etched deeper into his face told me life had not been kind. "Natalie," he said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under his boot. His voice was low, weary, but laced with something heavier, something that had been carried too long. "I didn't expect to see you here." I crossed my arms and leaned against the porch post. "Melissa invited you." He gave a short laugh. "Not exactly. I ran into your uncle last week at the store, and he told me about the dinner. Thought maybe it was time someone said something." There was an edge in his tone that made my chest tighten. I studied him in the dim porch light. "You look like a man with a story." His breath puffed white in the air as he looked back toward the house, then at me. "You know about the debts, don't you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "More than they think I know." He rubbed his hands together for warmth. His jaw clenched. "Then you should hear the rest. When Melissa and I were together, I had started a small marketing company in Denver. Nothing huge, but I was proud of it. We had a couple of local clients, enough revenue to keep the lights on and pay 2 employees. Melissa convinced me she could help with operations. Said she had connections, that she could bring in investors." His voice cracked with bitter laughter. "Instead, she siphoned money out of the accounts. At first small amounts, then larger ones. Said she needed to cover expenses, to host meetings, to impress potential clients. By the time I realized what was happening, nearly 80,000 was gone." My breath caught in my throat. 80,000. Daniel nodded grimly. I tried to hold on, but the hole was too deep. Clients left. Bills piled up. And within 6 months, I had to shut the doors. I lost the business, my apartment, my savings. She walked away without a scratch. For a long moment, I could not speak. My hands tightened around the porch railing, the wood icy beneath my palms. This wasn't just family favoritism anymore. This was ruin, inflicted beyond our walls. "Did she ever admit it?" I asked, my voice sharp. Daniel shook his head. "She said it was my fault for not managing better. She blamed me for being naive. Then she left for some trip to New York, with money she still had left." He leaned closer, his eyes hard. "I thought maybe your parents didn't know. But after the business collapsed, Thomas called me. Not to apologize, not to ask questions. He told me to stop talking about it. He said I was bitter, that Melissa was under stress, and that dragging her name would only make things worse. The night pressed in around me, the cold biting. But the heat in my chest flared. So they knew. They knew what she had done. Daniel nodded slowly. They knew. They wanted it buried. The porch light buzzed faintly above us, casting shadows across his face. I felt the ground tilt under me, the weight of what I carried growing heavier with every word. Melissa had not just drained family accounts or begged for bailouts. She had destroyed lives outside this house. And my parents had covered it. Daniel straightened, pulling his coat tighter. I heard them talking in town. People still whisper about it. No one wants to cross your family. But they all know. I came tonight because I thought you should know too. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Thank you, Daniel, for telling me. He nodded once, then stepped off the porch into the snow, disappearing into the night without another word. I watched him go until the sound of his footsteps faded. The Christmas lights from the dining room spilled onto the porch. Muffled laughter and clinking silverware, carrying faintly through the glass. Inside, they carried on the charade, pretending the cracks had not split wide open. But now I knew the truth stretched far beyond unpaid loans and family manipulation. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the rapid beat of my heart. Daniel's story burned in my mind, every detail sharp and unforgiving. Melissa had not just stumbled, she had taken, exploited, destroyed, and walked away, unrepentant. I turned back toward the house, the warmth glowing beyond the glass. My reflection stared back at me in the pain. Eyes dark, lips pressed tight. If I had ever doubted before, I doubted no longer. Melissa was not a victim of bad luck or misunderstood ambition. She was a predator, dressed in velvet and jewelry, smiling as she drained everyone in her path. The snowflakes drifted heavier now, coating the porch railing in white. I pushed the door open slowly, stepping back into the hum of voices and clatter of dishes. My family looked up, their faces expectant, searching for cues. I slipped back into my chair, my napkin smooth across my lap, my expression calm. Inside me, though, the resolve hardened like ice. Daniel's words had cemented what I already knew. Melissa would never change. And this Christmas dinner was only the stage for their next demand. My father cleared his throat and reached down to the floor, lifting a dark leather briefcase onto the table. The metallic snap of the latches opening cut through the clatter of forks and glasses. He pulled out a stack of papers, clipped neatly, and placed them squarely in front of me, as though he were setting down the main course. His voice was calm, almost gentle. But underneath I could hear the steel. All it takes is your signature, Natalie. Once this is done, everything will be behind us. This Christmas can end in peace. The words settled over the table with deceptive softness, as though he were asking me to pass the gravy. My eyes drifted down to the header on the top sheet. The legal language was dense, but I could recognize enough to understand the intention. Transfer of inheritance, redirection of funds. My grandmother's name printed coldly in bold type. I kept my hands folded in my lap, refusing to touch the papers. My mother leaned forward and reached for me, her hand wrapping around mine. Her skin was warm and damp, her eyes glistening as tears clung to her lashes. If you love this family, you will sign, she whispered, her voice trembling. If you want us whole, if you want your sister to survive, then prove it. Her grip tightened, a plea disguised as affection, her nails biting into my knuckles. Melissa shifted beside her, crossing and uncrossing her legs, her bracelets jingling with every nervous twitch. She tried to keep her voice steady, but bitterness broke through. You have everything you could ever need, Natalie. A career, a house in Denver, vacations, friends. Why are you making this so hard? I glanced at her Rolex as it caught the glow of the candles. The same watch she had flaunted hours earlier. The memory of Daniel's words echoed in my mind. Of the 80,000 siphoned from his company. Of his life dismantled piece by piece. She was not desperate. She was entitled. My father clasped his hands together, his elbows resting on the table. He gave me the same look he had used when I was a teenager facing discipline. Steady. Persuasive. Commanding. This is only a formality, he said. Your grandmother left more than enough to solve these issues. You will not even feel the difference. It is a small sacrifice for the greater good. Small sacrifice. My grandmother's life's work. Her careful savings. Her trust in me. To him. It was nothing but a tool. Melissa's face flushed. She leaned closer. Her voice sharp. You think you are better than me because you budget and save and live like a nun. I have dreams. Natalie. I have vision. You are just hoarding money. You will never use. My mother gasped at her daughter's tone, but did not correct her. Instead, she dabbed her napkin against her cheeks. Tears slipping freely now. Family is what matters, she said. Her voice cracking. Money cannot buy that. If you sign, you will save us. Around the table. Eyes shifted uneasily. Aunt Susan's lips pressed into a thin line. Elaine fidgeted with her fork. Her gaze dropping to her lap, the other relatives sat stiff. Their silence speaking volumes. They had all seen Melissa's patterns. Now they were watching me. Waiting for my choice. The papers slid across the table as my father pushed them closer. The edge brushed my plate. The sound of paper against porcelain jarring in the heavy quiet. Melissa straightened. Her jaw tight. Her voice breaking into desperation. You are ruining Christmas. You are ruining this family. All you have to do is sign. I felt the weight of every eye pressing down. The suffocating pressure of expectation. Of guilt. Of manipulation honed over years. My throat tightened. But my heartbeat was steady. Measured. Certain. I thought of Grandma Martha's frail hand gripping mine in that hospital bed. Her words etched into my memory. Protect your future. Do not let them drain you dry. I pulled my hand gently from my mother's grasp and folded both hands on my lap again. My silence stretched, growing heavier with each second. Melissa's cheeks burned red as she hissed that I was selfish, that I was jealous, that I had never understood her struggles. My father leaned forward, his tone low and grave. Natalie, this is your moment to show us who you are. Do not let pride poison this family. Pride. That was his charge against me. Pride for holding on to what was mine. Pride for honoring the trust my grandmother had given me. Pride for refusing to crumble under pressure. I lifted my glass of water, taking a slow sip, and placed it back on the table with care. My eyes scanned the papers in front of me, then rose to meet my father's gaze. He did not flinch, but I saw the flicker of impatience in his eyes. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The Christmas lights twinkled across the ornaments. The fire crackled in the living room. But none of it reached us here. The weight of the demand sat between the mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. Waiting for me to bend, Melissa slammed her hand down against the table, the silverware rattling. Just sign it. You do not care about anyone but yourself. Her outburst hung in the air, ugly and raw. My mother sobbed softly into her napkin. My father steadied his voice once more, repeating that this was for peace, that this was for love, that this was what Grandma would have wanted. I let the words pass over me like smoke. Calm spread through me. Quiet and cold. They believed they were cornering me, that the pressure would force my hand. But every tear, every accusation, every plea only hardened my resolve further. I folded my napkin slowly, aligning the edges with precision, and placed it beside my plate. The gesture was small, but deliberate. The papers remained untouched. My silence was my answer for now, steady and immovable. While I prepared for what would come next, I pushed my chair back and rose to my feet. the sound of the legs scraping against the hardwood echoing louder than it should have. Every face turned toward me. Expectant. Desperate. Some already triumphant. I let the silence stretch a few beats before I spoke. My voice calm and clear. Grandma Martha transferred the entire $2 million into a trust fund last year while she was still alive and sound of mind. Every account has already been secured. I froze the assets. None of you can touch a cent. The words detonated in the air. Melissa's chair tipped slightly as she jerked forward, her voice cracking into a scream. That is not true. You are lying. You are jealous because I am the one with ambition. My mother Evelyn burst into tears. Her napkin pressed hard against her face, her sobs breaking through the brittle cheer that had clung to the dinner. My father's face darkened, red spreading across his cheeks and down his neck. He looked like a man whose plan had slipped through his fingers, and he could not quite believe it. I stayed steady, my hands resting lightly on the back of my chair. I pulled my phone from my pocket, tilting the screen toward them. I have been recording since I walked through the door. In Colorado, only one party has to consent to a recording. Every word you spoke tonight, every attempt to coerce me into signing away my inheritance, is saved, backed up automatically to my attorney, Mr. Doyle, and to Jessica. A stunned silence fell, broken only by the faint clink of ice melting in a forgotten glass. Melissa shot to her feet, her voice shrill, shaking with rage. You betrayed us. You betrayed your own family. Her words tore across the room like glass shattering. But I did not flinch. I met her eyes, steady and unblinking. No. Melissa. I protected myself from the betrayal that has been happening for years. My father slammed his palm against the table, the plates rattling. Do you have any idea what you are doing? Natalie, you are tearing this family apart. The irony of his words burned hot in my chest. This family was torn apart long before tonight. I said evenly. I was just the only one willing to stop pretending. Melissa's face twisted, her voice rising higher, nearly incoherent. You think you are so perfect with your degrees and your savings accounts. You have no idea what it means to dream. I let her rage. The more she screamed, the clearer the picture became for everyone else at the table. Evelyn sobbed harder, mumbling through tears that all she had wanted was to keep her family together. That Christmas was supposed to be about love and forgiveness, but her eyes flicked again and again to the phone in my hand. Terror hiding beneath the grief. I straightened my shoulders, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. Grandma knew this day would come. That is why she made the trust irrevocable. That is why she placed every safeguard in it. With Franklin Doyle as co-trustee, you cannot touch it. And if you try, every message, every email, every witness here will confirm exactly what you have been doing. Around the table, the relatives who had stayed quiet looked at one another. Aunt Susan's expression was grimly satisfied. Elaine sat stiff, her lips pressed thin, but her eyes flickering with relief. The silence was no longer complicit. It was compounding. Melissa lunged toward me, her voice hoarse. Give me that phone. I stepped back, holding it calmly against my side. Even if you got it, I said. The files are already uploaded to the cloud. Jessica has them. Franklin has them. You cannot erase the truth. My father's face contorted, his voice dropping low. You will regret this. Natalie. No. I said, my tone colder now. The only regret I have is that it took me this long to see clearly. The air hung heavy with shock. The glittering ornaments on the tree reflected fractured light across the room. But none of the warmth of Christmas remained. It had been replaced with raw truth. Undeniable and final. Melissa collapsed back into her chair, her body shaking, her words collapsing into sobs of fury. You ruined me. You ruined us. I looked at her, at my mother, at my father, each of them unraveling in their own way. And I knew with piercing clarity that the victory was not in the money. It was in the moment I stopped letting them write my story. I set the phone down on the table for everyone to see. The screen glowing faintly. The room stayed silent. Trapped between the weight of exposed lies and the shock of defeat, the performance was over. The script had been torn apart, and I was the one still standing. The night outside was still and white when I finally opened the front door and stepped out. Cold air rushed against my face, sharp and biting, yet it felt cleaner than anything I had breathed inside that house. Snowflakes landed on my hair and coat, melting instantly, soaking into the fabric as I walked down the porch steps. Behind me, muffled voices rose and fell, frantic and desperate. But I did not turn back. Their anger no longer belonged to me. My boots crunched against the driveway, each step marking distance from years of control. The Christmas lights strung along the eaves of the house twinkled cheerfully, an irony not lost on me. Inside, my family's performance had ended in chaos. But out here, the world was quiet. The air cold and pure. I slid into my car, started the engine, and let the heater groan awake. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I sat there for a moment, staring at the glowing windows of the house I once thought of as home. Then, I shifted into drive and pulled away. The silence of that drive back to Denver was heavy but liberating. My chest hurt, but my breathing came easier. I knew something had ended permanently. Something that could never be repaired. What I did not know was what would come next. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread quickly. Melissa's condo was foreclosed. Notices were tacked to her door. And within weeks, movers carried her things out while neighbors whispered on the sidewalks. She had tried to keep up appearances online, posting old photos as if nothing had changed. But people in Denver knew better. My parents were not spared. They had co-signed several of Melissa's loans. And when she defaulted, the banks turned to them. Thomas and Evelyn sold their small cabin in Estes Park, a place once filled with laughter during summer weekends. They pawned off pieces of furniture I remembered from childhood, hoping to cover what remained. But no matter how much they sold, it was never enough. Word spread fast in Boulder, through neighbors and the congregation at church. I heard from Susan that whispers followed them down every aisle, that the perfect image they had worked so hard to project was shattered. At first, I thought their shame might soften them, bring reflection or even remorse. But it never came. My father clung to silence, my mother to tears, and Melissa to rage. None of them reached out with an apology. Their pride was too thick. Meanwhile, I chose a different path. I took a portion of the inheritance Grandma Martha had worked her whole life to build and used it to create the Martha Williams Foundation. Its mission was clear: to teach young women financial literacy, to help them understand not only how to budget and save, but how to guard themselves from exploitation. I poured my energy into building workshops across Denver, meeting students who reminded me of myself at 16, hungry to know how money worked, eager to hold their own futures in their hands. Jessica was with me at every step. She helped organize events, stood by me in board meetings, and showed up with takeout on nights when exhaustion threatened to win. Aunt Susan became my loudest supporter, speaking at community gatherings, reminding everyone that financial independence was a shield. Elena volunteered weekends, quiet but steady, mentoring younger women with a gentleness I admired. Together, they became my chosen family. They filled the void that my parents and sister had carved out with manipulation and favoritism. Christmases were no longer performances with staged smiles and hidden agendas. They were smaller, warmer, filled with honest laughter and food made with love. The first holiday we spent together after everything, I invited Jessica, Susan, and Elaine to my townhouse. Snow fell heavy outside while the fireplace glowed. We roasted chicken, baked gingerbread cookies, and poured spiced cider into mismatched mugs. The living room was cluttered with laughter and small, thoughtful gifts. Not expensive, but meaningful. For the first time in years, Christmas felt like it belonged to me again. Still, there were nights when I thought about my parents, about Melissa. The ache never fully disappeared. Blood ties leave scars even when you cut yourself free. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if they sat around their own table blaming me, convincing themselves I had been the one to destroy us. Other times, I wondered if they knew, deep down, that their choices had brought them here. I will never know for sure, but I have learned to live with that uncertainty. What I do know is this: I kept my grandmother's legacy intact. The trust she built did more than secure my future. It became the foundation for hundreds of other young women to start theirs. Every time I watched a student open her first savings account or proudly show off her budget binder, I felt Martha's presence, steady and proud. She had not just left me money. She had left me wisdom, and I had honored it. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, I stood by my window in Denver, looking out at the snow-covered street. The sound of laughter echoing from my kitchen, where Jessica and Elaine prepared dessert. Susan sat on the couch, sipping cider and humming along with the carols playing on the radio. My heart felt full, not because everything was perfect, but because what was left was real. I understood then that family is not about shared blood. Family is the people who show up, who stand beside you not for what you can give them, but for who you are. Christmas should be about love and family, but mine turned it into betrayal. What about you? Have you ever lived through a holiday that revealed more than you expected? Share your story in the comments. And if this one touched you, remember to like and subscribe so we can bring you more stories of resilience, justice, and finding freedom.